The year is 2018. The air in the livestock auction hall is thick. It smells of sawdust. It smells of sweat and wet wool. It smells of money. Frank Miller sat in the third row. He had sat in this row for 40 years. He was 72 years old. His hands were thick with knuckles. His eyes had seen tens of thousands of animals pass through the ring. Cattle, hogs, sheep. He knew the business. He knew the bloodlines. He knew what a good animal looked like, and he knew what a waste of time looked like. The auctioneer's voice was a rhythmic chant, a cadence that loosened wallets. Lot 212 was coming up. A special consignment. The Vance flock. Frank leaned forward slightly. He had heard the whispers for a few years. He didn't pay them much mind. Fads came and went in this business. Someone always had a new miracle breed, something that would change everything. It never did. The gate swung open. 12 ewes entered the ring. They were smaller than the Suffolks he usually brokered. Their wool was a strange, deep gray, almost silver in the bright lights. They moved with an unusual calm. The crowd murmured. Frank squinted. He recognized the ear tag, a simple blue notch. He remembered a farm, a long time ago, a young woman with worried eyes. He had been kind to her. He had given her good advice. The auctioneer started the bidding, $50,000 for the lot. Frank almost laughed. That was over $4,000 a head, for sheep. A hand shot up in the back. $100,000. The room went quiet. Frank Miller stopped breathing for a second. He felt his heart stutter. The auctioneer didn't miss a beat. $100,000 I have. Do I hear $150,000? A man on the phone, a buyer for a German consortium, nodded. $150,000. $200,000. The bids came in fast, like drumbeats. $250,000. $300,000. Frank Miller felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was the cold, hollow feeling of a man realizing he had been fundamentally wrong about something for a very, very long time. The auctioneer's gavel finally fell. Sold. For $540,000. To the buyer on the phone. The room erupted in applause. Frank Miller did not clap. He just stared at the sheep, at the simple blue ear tags. He remembered what he had told her. That day, 22 years ago. He remembered the exact words. He said, "Elara, I'm not going to be the man who wastes your time and my fuel." He said, "They're just sheep." This is the kind of story we tell here. The stories about people who were counted out. The ones who were told they couldn't. The ones who did it anyway. If these are the stories you need to hear, then you are in the right place. Subscribe to this channel, because the story of Elara Vance is not about the money. It's about what happens when the world tells you what you have is worthless, and you decide to believe in it anyway. Let me tell you how it began. It began with a death. It was March of 1996. The ground was a cold, hard mud. Elara Vance stood in the yard of her family's farm. The farm was 112 acres. Most of it was rocky pasture, good for little else but grazing. Her father, Thomas Vance, had died 2 weeks before. A heart that just gave out. He was 61. Elara was 24. She had his eyes. She had his quiet way of moving. She inherited the 112 acres. She inherited the small, white farmhouse. She inherited the $34,000 of debt owed to the bank. And she inherited the sheep. There were 87 of them. They were not an impressive sight. They were a breed her great-grandfather had brought over from the old country. Scrappy, mid-sized animals. They had dark faces and legs. Their fleece was not the bright white that the big mills paid for. It was a patchwork of grays and browns and blacks. Her father had called them his living heirlooms. The neighbors just called them mongrels. The debt was due in 6 months. Alara knew what she had to do. She had to sell the flock. It was the only asset she had, the only thing that could keep the bank from taking the land her family had worked for a century. She called the biggest livestock broker in the county, Frank Miller. Everyone knew Frank. He served on the county board. He coached Little League. He was an honest man, a fair man. He told her he'd be out on Tuesday. Have you ever had to make a call like that? A call that feels like a surrender? A call where you have to put a price on something that feels priceless? Tell us about it in the comments. Because what happened next changed everything for Alara Vance. This is where the story truly begins. Frank Miller's truck pulled into the drive at 10 in the morning. It was a clean Ford F-250. He stepped out. He was a big man, carried himself with an easy confidence. He shook Alara's hand. His grip was firm and dry. I'm sorry about your father, Alara. He was a good man. Thank you for coming, Frank. She led him to the pasture. The sheep were grazing near the old stone wall. They looked up as the two humans approached. Their eyes were a soft, intelligent yellow. Frank leaned on the fence post. He looked at the sheep for a long time. He didn't walk among them. He didn't check their teeth. He didn't part their fleece to check the staple length. He just stood and watched. Alara waited. The silence stretched out. Finally, he sighed. He turned to her. He had a kind look on his face, a look of genuine sympathy. Alara, he said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've brokered nearly 1 million head of livestock. He paused. He wanted her to understand he was speaking from experience. He believed he was protecting her. These sheep, he said, they're a novelty. The mills won't buy this wool. It's too coarse. The color is inconsistent. The meat buyers, they want a bigger carcass, a Suffolk or a Hampshire cross. You might get $40, maybe $50 a head at the local sale, and that's on a good day. Alara felt her stomach tighten. She had done the math. $50 a head wouldn't even cover the fuel to get them there. It wouldn't touch the debt. She looked at Frank. But you could take them to the big auction? The one in Stanton? Frank shook his head slowly. He looked her right in the eye. He wanted to be clear. He wanted to be kind. This was the most dangerous limitation, the one delivered with kindness. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven with decades of work. Alara, he said, his voice soft. The auction in Stanton is for prime commercial stock. The commission is 4%. The trucking alone would cost you $500. I can't in good conscience take your money for that. You'd lose money on the trip. I'm not going to be the man who does that to Tom Vance's daughter. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was meant to be a comforting gesture. My advice? Sell them privately. To a spinner's guild, maybe. Or for meat to folks around here. Cut your losses. Focus on the land. He truly believed he was helping. This certainty, not cruelty, is always the antagonist. Then he said the words she would never forget. The words that would echo for the next 22 years. He looked from her to the flock and back again. I'm sorry, Alara, but I can't sell them for you. They're just sheep. It's not worth the drive. He got back in his clean truck. He drove away. And Alara Vance stood alone by the fence, watching the animals that were her only hope. The animals she had just been told were worthless. She walked back to the house. The air felt cold and thin. The farmhouse was quiet. It still smelled like her father, of pipe tobacco and wood smoke. She sat at the kitchen table, the table her great-grandfather had built. She saw the foreclosure notice from the bank on the counter, a stark white piece of paper, a death sentence for the farm. She felt a wave of despair. Frank Miller was right. He was the expert. He knew the market. She was just a girl who had lost her father. What did she know? She thought about selling the land, just letting it go, moving to the city, getting a job, forgetting this place, forgetting the rocks and the mud and the sheep. Then her eyes fell on something on the bookshelf. It was a row of old ledgers, bound in cracked, dark leather. Her father's records. His father's records before him. She pulled one down. The year on the spine was 1975. She opened it. The pages were filled with her father's elegant, looping script. It wasn't just numbers, it was a story. Each page was dedicated to a single you, a name at the top: Daisy, Willow, June. Below the name was a family tree, a lineage traced back for generations. Birth weights, fleece weights, number of lambs, notes in the margins. Good mother. Throws twins consistently. Resistant to foot rot. She saw notes about the wool. He had sold it, but not to the big mills. He sold it in small batches, to weavers in Vermont, to spinners in North Carolina, to artisans who wanted the specific colors, the deep grays, the warm browns. He got 3 times the price per pound that the commercial mills paid. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was consistent. It was a niche. She pulled down another ledger, 1952, her grandfather's handwriting, the same meticulous detail, the same care. She stayed there for hours, going through the books, one generation after another. She saw her family's history not in photographs, but in the genetics of these animals. They had survived blizzards. They had survived droughts. They had survived depressions. They had survived because they were tough. Because they didn't need special grain. They thrived on the rocky pasture. They lambed easily on their own. They were self-sufficient, just like her family. Finally, she reached the very last page of the oldest ledger. From her great-grandfather. The year was 1919. The ink was faded. His English was still broken. He wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. A philosophy. A promise. A piece of advice passed down through the silence of generations. The bloodline is the bank. Don't ever let them touch the principal. Elara closed the book. She looked out the window at the flock. They weren't just sheep. They were a living bank account, a genetic trust fund. Frank Miller saw livestock. Her father saw a legacy. In that moment, she made a decision. She was not going to sell. She was not going to surrender. She would not let them touch the principal. She picked up the foreclosure notice, and she tore it in half. The first few years were the hardest. Let me tell you about those years. The bank gave her a 90-day extension, a courtesy, they said, for her father. It wasn't a reprieve. It was a ticking clock. Elara went through her father's ledgers again. She wrote down the name of every weaver he had ever sold to, every spinner, every artisan. She spent a week on the phone. Most of the numbers were disconnected. Some of the people had retired or died. But she found 3. 3 who remembered her father. They remembered his wool. They asked if she had any. She said yes. She did not know how to shear a sheep. Her father had always hired a professional crew. She couldn't afford a crew, so she learned. She called her neighbor, Silas Croft. He was 80 years old. His hands were gnarled with arthritis. He had known her father his whole life. He came over the next morning. He didn't ask questions. He just brought an old shearing machine, a Lister Shearmaster. He showed her how to set it up, how to sharpen the combs and cutters, how to handle the sheep without a fight. It's a dance, he told her. You let the animal do the work. You just guide them. Her first sheep took 2 hours. Her back screamed. Her hands were slick with lanolin and sweat. The fleece was a mess, full of second cuts. but she did it. The next one took an hour and a half. By the end of the week, she could do one in 15 minutes. She packed the wool in burlap sacks. She sent it to the 3 weavers. The check that came back was for $1,200. It wasn't enough, not even close, but it was a start. It was proof. Frank Miller was wrong. The wool wasn't worthless. It was just worth something to the right people. She took that money to the bank. She paid the interest on the loan. She bought herself another 30 days. That summer, she found a new market: ethnic food stores in the city. They wanted lamb, but not the big, fatty lamb from commercial breeds. They wanted a smaller, leaner animal, an animal that tasted like the ones from the old country. Her sheep were perfect. She sold 10 lambs, cash, $2,000. She paid down the principal on the loan. The bank manager looked surprised. She started to build a reputation, not with the big players, not with men like Frank Miller, but on the fringes, with the artisans, the foodies, the people who cared about story, who cared about heritage. She used the internet. It was new then. She built a simple website. She posted pictures of the sheep. She told their story. She wrote about her father, about her great-grandfather, about the ledgers, about the bloodline. The bloodline is the bank. Orders started coming in, small at first. A single fleece to a woman in Oregon, a breeding ram to a small farm in Kentucky. Every sale was a victory. Every dollar was a stone in the foundation of her independence. She worked from sunup to sundown, mending fences, hauling hay, delivering lambs in the dead of winter. Her hands became rough. Her face was lined by the sun. She was often tired. She was often lonely. But she was free. She owed nothing to anyone except the bank. And she was slowly, quietly paying them off. Because this is where the story becomes bigger than one woman and one farm. This is about the quiet power of consistency. By the year 2000, she was clear of the bank. The farm was hers, free and clear. She had a flock of 150 ewes, every one of them traced back to her father's original flock. She bought her neighbor's pasture when he retired, 60 acres, cash. Frank Miller drove past her farm sometimes. He saw the new fencing. He saw the growing flock. He heard the talk at the co-op. He didn't understand it. He saw a woman working herself to the bone for a niche market. A hobby, he thought. He was still brokering thousands of head a week, making good money. He was in the volume business. He didn't see the storm coming. By 2005, the market was changing. Wool prices for commercial fleece plummeted. Competition from overseas. Lamb prices were volatile, dependent on feed costs, corn, soy. Frank's clients were leveraged. Big loans on land, big loans on equipment. They were chasing pennies on the dollar. Clara had no debt. Her sheep ate grass. Her costs were low. Her profits were high. She sold her wool for $40 a pound. The mills were paying $2. She sold her breeding rams for $5,000 apiece. Commercial rams sold for $500. Contrast math. The numbers tell the story of who was right. She was not in the livestock business. She was in the genetics business. The bloodline is the bank. In 2008, the financial crisis hit. Farmers who were deep in debt went under. Frank Miller lost a lot of clients. His business slowed. That year, Clara bought another farm, 200 acres of prime bottomland, cash. She started a waiting list for her breeding stock, 2 years long. Universities started calling. Genetics departments wanted to study her flock, their parasite resistance, their maternal instincts, their feed efficiency. They discovered the Vance line, as they called it, had unique genetic markers. a resilience that had been bred out of most commercial sheep, what the neighbors had called mongrels, science called invaluable. Ilara never gloated. She never mentioned Frank Miller's name. She just did the work, day after day, year after year. By 2012, she had a flock of 500. She had buyers in Europe, in New Zealand. She hired a farm manager. She started speaking at conferences, telling her story, telling her father's story. Frank Miller saw her picture in a magazine, the shepherd who saved a bloodline. He read the article. It didn't mention him, but he felt his presence in the empty spaces, in the story of a young woman who had been told her animals were worthless. He felt a prickle of something uncomfortable, the quiet witness. Watching from a distance as the protagonist succeeds is its own form of justice. By 2017, Ilara knew it was time. Her flock was too big. She couldn't manage the genetics properly anymore. She needed to downsize, to get back to the core. But she wanted to do it right. She wanted to make a statement, not for revenge, not for pride, but for her father, for the sheep. She decided to sell a small, elite group, the best of the best, at the biggest, most prestigious livestock auction in the state, the one in Stanton, the one Frank Miller had told her wasn't for her. She consigned 12 ewes, the pinnacle of her 22 years of work. The auction house marketed it for months, the Vance flock, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The world of heritage breeds was watching, and Frank Miller, who still went to the Stanton auction every month out of habit, saw the flyers. He saw the name. And he decided he had to be there. He had to see it for himself. Which brings us back to that day in 2018, to the auction hall, to the smell of sawdust and money. Frank Miller sat in the third row. The gavel had just fallen. $540,000 for 12 sheep. $45,000 a head. The man next to Frank, a young farmer, whistled. Can you believe that? For a dozen sheep. Frank couldn't speak. He just shook his head. He watched as Ilara Vance walked into the ring. She looked different, older, more confident. But her eyes were the same, quiet, steady. She patted one of the ewes on the neck, a simple, familiar gesture. She didn't smile at the crowd. She didn't wave. She simply stood with her animals. The auctioneer handed her the sale summary. She glanced at it. Then she looked out at the crowd. Her eyes scanned the faces, and for a moment, they met Frank's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no anger, no, "I told you so." There was just a quiet, devastating calm. A look that said, "You saw sheep, but you didn't see the story. You saw an obstacle, but you didn't see the work. You saw a girl, but you didn't see the generation standing behind her." Frank looked away. He felt the full weight of his mistake. It wasn't that he had misjudged the market value of a few animals. It was that he had misjudged a person. He had drawn a circle around her capabilities. He had done it with kindness, with concern, with the best of intentions, and that made it so much worse. He had tried to protect her from a small failure, and in doing so, he had almost prevented an extraordinary success. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind is the loneliest fight there is. He stood up. He didn't wait for the next lot. He walked out of the auction hall, into the bright, unforgiving sunlight. He felt 72 years old. But that's not the end of the story, because a legacy is not about the money you make. It's about the opportunities you create for others. Ilara Vance took that money, the $540,000, and she used it to start a foundation, the Thomas Vance Heritage Breed Trust. It gives grants to young farmers, men and women who want to work with heritage breeds, people who have a passion but no capital. The first grant was for $25,000. It went to a young couple in Ohio. They wanted to raise heritage pigs. The bank had turned them down, said it was too risky. too niche. Ilara flew out to meet them. She walked their small farm. She listened to their story. She saw the same fire in their eyes that she had felt 22 years earlier. She wrote the check right there, on the hood of her truck. Today, the trust has given out over $2 million in grants. It has helped launch 57 new farms. 57 families who didn't have to listen to a gatekeeper tell them no. Ilara's flock is smaller now, back to a manageable 100 ewes. She spends most of her time mentoring, answering calls from young shepherds, teaching them about genetics, about marketing, about the quiet art of believing in something nobody else can see. The Vance line is now a global standard. Its genetics are used to improve flocks all over the world, adding resilience, adding strength, adding value. The bloodline is the bank, and the principle just keeps growing. On a wall in her farmhouse office, there is a framed document. It's the sales summary from the 2018 auction, a simple piece of paper. Lot 212, 12 ewes, $540,000. Next to it hangs a shepherd's crook. It is old. The wood is worn smooth by a lifetime of use. It was her father's. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, she takes it down from the wall. She can feel the presence of her father, her grandfather, her great-grandfather. The quiet, stubborn men who pass down more than just a flock of sheep. They pass down a way of seeing the world, a belief that the true value of a thing is not in its market price, but in its story, in its resilience, in its ability to endure. The dirt is enough. The bloodline is the bank. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. Someone is being told their idea is too small, too niche, too strange. They are being told this by someone who is kind, someone who is experienced, someone who genuinely believes they are helping. And that person has a choice. They can accept that limitation, or they can pick up their father's ledger and start the long, quiet work of proving them wrong. This story is for them. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. The world is full of people who will tell you what is impossible. Don't be one of them, not even to yourself. Subscribe for more stories of quiet triumph. And in the comments below, tell us about a time you chose to believe in the bloodline, to protect the principle, to do the work. We want to hear your story.